date is December 4th, 1991. We're going to visit with Mr. Frank Collins, a longtime resident of the Cherokee Strip. Morning, Mr. Collins.
Good morning, Mr. Gauthier.
For the record, Mr. Collins, would you mind stating your full name and your date of birth, please?
Frank Charles Collins, May 6, 1914. Is named after both my grandparents.
Where were you born, Frank?
Hutchinson, Kansas.
When did you come into the state of Oklahoma?
1917 or 18.
So you would have been approximately how old then?
About 3 or 4.
Had your family been farmers all their life, or did they work in some other trade?
Well, they've been farmers all their life, with the exception of when my father and mother got married and moved from Oklahoma to Kansas. He worked in a big salt factory up there. While we lived up there. Then he come back to the farm again.
Frank, you mentioned you were born in Kansas, but what brought your parents into Oklahoma?
They come with their parents to make the run.
And then they went back to Kansas.
After they were married, they went back to Kansas for a period of around 5 years. And then my father come back to farm the original farm again after Granddad retired.
Where did your grandfather settle, Frank?
He settled 3.5 miles west of Los Alamos on a farm that had a creek, one end to the other, and lots of wood on it.
When you returned to Oklahoma with your parents, tell us something about farm life.
Well, it was pretty new to me, having been born in a town. I don't remember after we got settled there, my father took me down to the grain bin and asked me what that was, and I said it was beans. I had never seen wheat before in a city kid.
What kind of chores did you have to do?
I had to get the kiln in, carry the water to when mother washed clothes on the washboard. But we had carried about 100 yards, put it in the coffee boiler, put lye in it to break the hard water. She always baked beans and cornbread the day she washed. I remember one day she got the washing all hung on the line, and she got that done. It was in summertime. It was real dusty. The line broke. It all fell down in the dust. I cried because I thought it was really tragic, which it really was. But
Frank, what kind of animals did you have on this farm? Did you milk cows or have pigs or anything of this nature?
we had pigs, cattle, and hogs, and Dad always had a string of brood mares. He raised 5 or 6 colts every year. We broke every spring. We broke 4 or 5 colts, and we worked them during the summer and got them broke real good. And he'd sell the best in the fall. We raised our own power. We milked several cows that I had to help milk before I went to school.
What'd you do for refrigeration, Frank?
Didn't have any.
Did you make butter?
Yes, made butter.
How did you keep butter?
Well, we put it in a cave. I guess that would be our refrigeration. Kept it in a cave. So we separated the milk, fed the skim milk to the calves, made butter, sold cream. That's the way we bought our groceries. The eggs, milk and butter and stuff.
Frank, let's talk about your school a little bit. Did you start to school in Oklahoma?
Yes,
What type of a school? Tell us about your school. What type of school was it?
we had a one-room school. All the grades were in it. And then we sat in the wide desks compared to what they are now. And a lot of the kids sat together. There was only one other kid in my class, and we sat together for 2 or 3 years. teacher would give us permission to change sides sometimes.
When you said all classes,
From 1 through 8.
one, what'd you study?
We had reading and writing and arithmetic. We had old spin and Syrian push and pulls and ovals. We wrote with a pen that we dipped in ink. And we had it every day. Kids learned how to write then. Of course, we had arithmetic. We had spelling matches with other schools on occasionally, maybe once a month.
Well, now, when you said other schools, Frank, weren't the schools kind of far apart?
3 miles each direction.
How did you get to these other schools?
Well, the teacher usually took us and, well, there wasn't too many cars when I started school. Model T had a few Model Ts and things like that. I suppose they took us in a wagon and things. We couldn't all get in one car. And we had spelling matches and cipher matches and track meets between the other schools. It's like they have Olympics now.
Were these schools used for anything else other than education?
The one I went to was used for church, had church in it, and literary meets and things in the community. They had church there regularly for a number of years, prayer meeting, whatever you call it.
You mentioned all 8 grades in one classroom. How many kids are we talking about?
Well, it varied somewhat. I'd say from 25 to close to 40 something. I think about the biggest class we ever was close to 40. Be pretty crowded.
When you got through with the 8th grade, what happened then?
I went to high school. I might say that back when I was in the 7th grade, they had a county examination that everybody had to pass before they could pass to the next grade. And in 8th grade, they had a county examination that you had to pass before you could enter high school. And they didn't have that in high school. I was a green kid. I felt like I'd be a dummy, but after I got there, I found out I was about as smart as any of them. But they had to take the test that I had.
Where'd you go to high school, Frank?
Walcomas. My aunts and a lot of them went to Walcomas. My wife's folks went to Walcomas. In fact, my wife's mother was the first class to graduate out of the high school in Walcomas around 1903 or 4. Both of her granddads were on school board. They was on school board when Walcomas is the first consolidated school district in Garfield County. They were both on school board when they took in a school called Greenie out east of Walcomas. And had a bus, a hack to haul the kids in.
How'd you get to high school?
I walked for the first year, 3.5 miles.
No school buses?
No. Only for Greenie, the one that consolidated, the one grade school that they took in. The rest high school kids had no buses. I walked 3.5 miles a day.
Frank, when you graduated from high school, did you go back to the farm, or what type of work did you do then?
Well, I put out my first wheat crop in the fall of 1929, harvested in 1930, graduated in 31, but the Depression was starting. I stayed with my junior, senior year with an old-time grocer, Briar Rib, who made me run to Walcomas. And he talked to the salesman back east, and they told him a terrible depression was coming, it had already started. So him and my grandfather and folks talked it over, and I quit farming for a period of about 3 years. I went on a tour as his chauffeur, and we went to every state west of the Mississippi River, 2 western provinces of Canada, down the California coast into Old Mexico, which is quite a tour for a 16-year-old kid.
How many miles did you travel on that?
About 8,000 miles in a Model A car.
How many of you?
2.
Pretty good roads at that time?
Well, dirt and gravel. They only had pavement just outside of town.
Let's go back to farming, Frank. What was wheat worth in 1929, 30, 31?
Well, I harvested my crop first crop that I harvested in 1930. Wheat was 75 cents a bushel at harvest time. I didn't sell on enough to pay expenses, and we went on that extended trip. Come back and I sold my wheat in February, and it was 58 cents. I lost 20 cents a bushel. The depression was moving in.
Did wheat go much lower than 58 cents a bushel?
Went down to 25. So my advice was that the depression was coming on was good. I think I quit farming for a period of years.
After you got back from your trip, I assume you started farming again then?
No, I was a junior in high school. I went to high school a year, and then I stayed with him for a couple more years. We went down to Old Mexico and made a lot of other tours. I didn't start farming again until 1934. I did chop wood out in the back jacks in the winter of 33. Lived in a tent, sold wood for $2 a rick. Rick there and delivered 25 miles to Enid for $2 a rick.
Times were starting to improve in 1934, weren't they?
Not very much. To my recollection, times never got better till Hitler started the war over there, and we got defense plants started and things. 50 years ago from now, wheat was only 99 cents a bushel, which would be in 41, so we didn't go up till after World War II started.
Frank, let's go back a little ways now. What type of a house did your granddad have when he settled here?
First, he had a dugout in the bank, but of course they had limbs and dirt over it. And then he built a 2-room house, built out of 1-by-4s with a 2-inch batting to fill up the cracks. And these 10 people lived in that. They papered it with newspapers and had a little round metal thing with a hole in it they tacked on to hold the newspapers. I've seen all this. I saw the newspapers on the wall and all this stuff. Later he built a typical 4-room square house like so many people did.
How was this house furnished, Frank? It's this first house.
I don't know, really. I had a stove, I know, and I remember one time Dad told about that come a rainstorm and the turtle was and he fell down through and the water began pouring in, and Granddad throwed him in the stove. He throwed him alive in the stove. It was furnished very, very plain. My dad didn't have shoes to wear the first 2 or 3 years. He wrapped his feet with gunny sacks in the wintertime. He was very, very poor.
Who was a doctor in your area?
Well, they had several doctors. They had a Dr. Scott who delivered one of my dad's younger brothers, and his mother died of childbirth at that time in 1900. And Dr. Scott, Dr. Wolf, Dr. Brown, and Dr. Moss, 4 doctors in the little town of Wacomas.
That's rather unusual, wasn't it?
It seemed to me that it was. And Mayberry was down there, who later come to Enid and started the Mayberry Hospital. We had some good doctors for that time.
Frank, we're going to just skip around now for a while. I want to go back to butchering. Did you butcher yourself, or was it a community project, or dad and son project? How did butchering?
Well, the neighbors different. They done it different. We always butchered ourselves. Dad was an expert butcher. We butchered the beef, big beef every fall, and he'd hang it up on the windmill. I mean, he had a block and tackle. They claim if you hang beef up at least 20 feet above the ground that the flies won't bite it. And when we wanted beef in the winter, we'd let it quarter down and just slice a big slice of steak off the bottom of it. We also butchered hogs. He cured our hams, and we ground the sausage and put it down in lard in stone jars. And
how'd you make lard?
Well, you trim all the fat off of the hog, and then with the skin and you cut it up in chunks, about maybe an inch or two square, and they put it in a big iron kettle, build a fire, and you just let her go till it's melted, then you skim it, or skim it off, you know, so it don't have any things in it. Took the crackings in and made soap.
Is that pretty good for your cholesterol, that lard?
Well, my dad lived to be 91 years old. One of his sisters lived to be 94. I don't think they had cholesterol invented at that time. And after, besides that, my aunts, my dad's sisters, was 94 years old, had only one filling in her tooth. And she was so proud of that, she told everybody. So I don't think lard hurt anybody at that time.
What kind of fuel did
Wood,
you use?
Wood. Dad always bought a little coal in the fall of the year. He'd go over to Oklahoma and buy a lumber wagon box maybe full of coal. But we mostly burned wood. And we go out to blackjacks or cut wood on the creek. We didn't have chainsaws at that time, and axes.
What was your favorite food, Frank? What did you really look forward to your mother making?
I liked homemade bread, and of course I've always a meat eater. We had a lot of oatmeal, cocoa with that good old rich cream in it. But during the war years, you couldn't buy flour. You either had cornbread or made out of Catholic corn. And I remember one time at the table, I got tired of eating that stuff, and I says, "Mother, how come we have to have this all the time?" She says, "There's a war going on." It says, "My brother's over there. He volunteered in the Rainbow Division, went over the first company that went over to war, fought under the French generals." He said, "We have a war, and we have to."
Did your mother can?
Yes, a lot of stuff, and everything, all kind of vegetables and things.
When you got sick, what kind of home remedies did you have? Or did you have a home remedy?
Well, my grandmother was a part Indian, and my mother's mother, her mother come across on the Trail of Tears, and those Indians had a lot of home remedies. My grandmother was considered what do you call, midwife. She delivered lots of kids. She was considered an expert on pneumonia people, and they come to my grandmother for treatment. Of course, we used to tie an acidity bag around her neck. They thought that kept the flu away. I don't know whether it helped any or not. But we didn't go to the doctor only on emergencies.
In 1918, there was an outbreak of the flu. Did it hit your area?
Yes, very hard. I had a cousin that her folks went on a trip and left her and her older brother, I think, there. They were gone 2 days and she died. She was well when they left. They went up in Kansas, communications so bad that they could never notify her parents. Her parents come in home on the day they had the funeral at the house. That's the first funeral I ever remember. My cousin was 13 years old. She died in 3 days or 2 days after she took sick.
Frank, let's go back a little ways again to the land opening. You said your grandparents made the run. One of your grandparents made the run.
Well, 4 of them made the run.
4 of them. How'd they make the run? Horseback, wagon, foot?
Horseback.
Any incidents that took place?
I don't recall any. I remember one of them, my uncle saying that he was over to the neighbors, I think the day or the night of the run, and somebody told him somebody's on his claim, so he says, "I'll go over there and take care of it." He come back, and they asked him what happened. He says, "Well, we don't have to worry about that fellow anymore. I don't know what happened." That's what he said. But he kept his claim.
After they made this run, stake their so-called claim, what did they have to do?
Well, they had to live on it so many years, do so much work on it, break out so much ground. Of course, they had to go up and stand in line and file on their claim and stuff, or else have somebody else stand in line for them while they went home and done some work.
where'd they file here in,
Let us here in Enid, the land office building was on the southwest corner of the square, but the land office building, according to my parents, wasn't completed at the day of the run, and they had a tent. So you had to get a allotment or permission to make the run. You just couldn't go down there and fall in line. You had to have identification to make the run, so it was legitimate. And they got their permits through the tent office before this wooden building, which is now here.
you're telling me then that if I wanted to make the run, I had to come in and get my credentials filed and get permission to make the run? I couldn't make it and then go file my claim?
You had to have permission or some kind of identification. See, they closed this run up several days before it, so we got everybody supposedly out and let nobody come across it. If it was too late to come across before the run, you had to go way around east to Stillwater to come, drive miles and miles out of the road if you want to start from the south.
Frank, what was a social? What did they refer to as a social?
To the schoolhouse, and they had singing things and all such things of that. Pie suppers, I guess, and different things. And
Box supper? You know what a box supper is?
how well I know what a box supper is.
What, explain a box supper.
Well, we'd have a Christmas, the teacher put on Christmas programs and things. Box suppers were used to raise a little money for the school, and everybody was invited to ask to bring a cake or a pie or whatever, a box, and then they auctioned them off, and you got to eat with the one that bought the box got to eat with the person that brought it. So sometimes the box would bring a lot of money if somebody knew who it was, to get to eat with a pretty young girl.
In my day.
Where'd you meet your wife? At a box supper?
No, I met her. It's very strange. I think it's an act of God. I was very fortunate to meet the most wonderful woman that ever lived. And we met at my aunt's place. She come over to work for my aunt, and we was out in the bean patch picking beans, and I went out to help her. That's where we met. We were married 3 months later. We lived 54 years now together, and I don't know whether it's going to last or not.
Well, we'll test it and see.
Yeah, we'll wait and see, won't we?
Frank, law enforcement in the area, did your grandfather, your father ever speak of the first law enforcement that you had around this area?
One of my uncles that made the run belonged to the anti-horse thief thing. He was a big officer in that. You know, he had lots of horse stealing back then, and they didn't have a long trial like we did now and turn them loose. They either hung them or done something. And my uncle's grandson still has the 38 revolver that he had when he was in the horse thief thing ahead of it.
Frank, do you remember when men actually carried guns?
Oh, yeah.
When did they do away with this?
I don't really know when it got so they didn't carry guns, but I remember when they carried guns. I think they got more civilized. And, you know, the people come in here were not too common people. They were sturdy. They had nothing to lose and all to gain. And they wasn't scared of anybody. They were very rugged individuals. They made their own law, of course. As far as criminals thing, they took care of people who got out of line.
What kind of celebrations did the community have along the way when after statehood? You know, what kind of celebrations did you go
Well,
to?
they had-
What do you remember most?
Well, we had the fair over at Wacomas, their local fair, and then we had the county fair. We had rodeo and Enid way back there. But Wacomas had fairs that wouldn't quit. They had 4 saloons at that time, my dad told about, and a lot of the people got drunk. They had to close all of the saloons, and they had what they called a cooler. They put people in when they restrained them until they sobered up. Had lots of fights. Things got out of control when they had the first fairs and things.
4th of July, a big day in your life?
Not really. Not when I was young.
Christmas.
Christmas was, we always had a big dinner with toys. We didn't have very many toys, but we usually went to my grandmother's house to eat dinner. We had pumpkin pie, and chicken or duck or whatever.
How far away did your grandmother live?
About 4 miles. We went back and forth in the buggy. Our buggy didn't have a top on it. We were very poor. One time we was up to my grandmother's, come up a big rain, so home they loaned us their buggy, which had a top on it. We left ours there. The weather got better.
Frank, as you were growing up, there were different organizations of all kinds throughout. Was KKK in your area?
It sure was. I've seen their parades several times.
Were you a member of the KKK?
Definitely not. That's a dirty word in my family.
Do you remember a riot that took place in Tulsa about 1921?
I remember it in the news, I sure do. North part of Tulsa, black people, there were several people killed.
Were there any riots like that that ever happened in Enid area?
Not to my knowledge, it was newsworthy, really. I know the Ku Klux Klan marched and they'd have meetings. I remember one time they had a meeting in a field a mile south where Granddad lived. My granddad was very opposed to it. He slipped down the draw, stayed off in the weeds and listened to their meeting, and unfortunately he knew a lot of the people who was members. My grandfather was a fearless individualist.
World War I, 1918. How old were you, Frank?
Before 1980. But
Any of your uncles serve in World
a
War
lot
I?
of my mother's brother enlisted or volunteered, whatever you call it, and he was sent to Fort Bowie, Texas. And I don't know how long he was down there until they asked for volunteers, and he volunteered for the 1st Division. They called it the Rainbow Division because it had soldiers from every state in the Union. So Mother and I and Granddad and Grandmother went down on the train to Fort Worth, my second train ride, visited him in camp before he went back overseas. Before he went overseas. He fought under a French general when he went over there. And I was out to the camp and seen how they lived in the tents and floors and all that stuff.
Frank, your family has served in what wars?
Well, my great-grandfathers, I had 4 of them served in the Civil War on the side of the North. One of them got killed, my great-granddad Collins. We never found him, how he disappeared, and they never knew how he was killed. Until I found out about 15 years ago, about 1970-something, I got to research and found out he's buried over in Tennessee at the Battle of Fort Henry. And none of the rest of, all the rest of them survived. So they had gunshot wounds and things. One of them got his trigger finger shot off.
Frank, let's go back to, or let's move ahead to the Depression era. Were you involved in the so-called soup lines?
No. People lived on the farm had an advantage over people in town and didn't suffer near as bad. My wife's folks lived in town, and you lived in town during the Depression, you suffered terribly. We raised most of our food and stuff and didn't really suffer that much.
Are you an Okie, Frank?
Well, I don't know what you call an Okie. I was born in Kansas, and I consider myself an Okie because all my parents, we lived here all our lives.
Would it make you mad if somebody called you an Okie?
It definitely would not.
At one time, It was a so-called slang word.
But that was just in California. What
I understand, I'll just make a comment at this time, that Oklahoma, we talk about wars, took California without firing a shot.
If it wasn't for Oklahoma, California wouldn't be what it is today.
Okay, we'll pass on now.
I guess that's debatable with some people.
Frank, do you remember the dust storms? Did you see any of them?
I certainly do.
Tell me what they look like. What?
Well, I started farming back in '34 again, and I can remember a cloud would come up in the northwest. It looked black, and it just looked like it was going to come a whale of rain, and all we'd have was dust. And these dust flowed in from western Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico was a different color from the soil here and settled on our stuff.
What caused these dust storms, Frank?
Drought, and they didn't have poor farming method. They didn't have the machinery to stop dust blowing, and they didn't know. They figured if you worked the ground, it'd make it blow worse. And with horses, you didn't have the power to stop it anyway. They broke up too much of the grassland in western Kansas and western Oklahoma. And we had a terrible drought for about 4 or 5 years. During that drought, the big old cottonwood trees that was here when the run opened on the place we lived on died. Most of them died from the drought. They're living right along the creek where they've been there for 40 years or more. And the grass dried in the pasture and stuff. I mean, it was, you can't imagine.
We've always had tornadoes, floods, fires. Any of those stand out in your mind of something disastrous?
Well, I can remember several in the country. We had one storm went through the country, tore down practically every barn in the immediate community. It didn't hit us. We missed it. We had a cave, however, that we used quite frequently when the clouds looked bad. We didn't have a weather thing to listen to. But we had a lot of tornadoes in the country, and several floods. In 1911, they had a bad storm. My folks talk about 1932. We had a big flood, and we had one in '57 and one in '73. And the succeeding ones were always bigger than the first one. The water got higher on the creeks and things.
Your parents, grandparents, came into Oklahoma from what state, Frank?
They all come from Kansas. I mean,
What nationality were they? What origin did they get here to this country?
well, on my grandmother's side, some of her parents was like Will Rogers said, they was here to meet the Mayflower. And then one of them would come from Holland, Dutch, and settled in Pennsylvania, and consequently moved down to Kansas, and he come down here in the run. One of them was, my great-grandmother was a Swiss, pure-blood Swiss. She come from Switzerland. And my granddad, Collins, was an Irish Englishman. His grandparents come from England.
Did any of them come through Ellis Island, Frank?
If they did, I don't know. They had to come, if they come in here from Holland, Switzerland, I think they would, but I never had heard anything about the exact happening or anything.
Anything you think we might have left out that you would want to say before we sign off here today?
Well, I think I've lived through the best time in the history of the world. There's been more progress. I went from buggy to people going to the moon. And I don't think there's any other time in history we've had such progress. And I think we're fortunate to live in the time we lived in. I think the United States has reached its peak and on the downgrade. It'll never be a top-notch nation again. People like that kind of last remark. Sincerely believe it.
Yes.
Of that.
This is full of red button, either up or down.
Out you get, girls, come on. That's it. Elvis, you'll take care of the luggage and take care of the girls and see that they get on the train, won't you?
Yes.
I'll be right along.
Hello, sweet. You had me worried. I thought you were going to miss your train.
Oh, Dewey, darling, I'm so sorry I was late. I didn't know that at last
So
minute.
what is this, Jean? An airy drill? Are you moving the whole school?
No, just the honors students. They get the trip as a prize. Miss Bromley was going to take them herself, but she had a toothache, so I was elected.
Well, I thought it was kind of sudden. Where are you taking them, teacher?
Oh, just a few places of historic interest.
How long are you going to be away?
Several days.
Several days.
When you go away on your ship, it's for several weeks. Now you know how I feel.
You mean to say you miss me?
I mean to say.
That's nice. Come on.
Oh,
I wish I were an honor student, Jean, so I could come along, too.
why don't you?